Got it.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I want to introduce you tonight to Jeff Melanson. Jeff is a really interesting guy. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him in a minute, but he wrote a really interesting post recently about artificial intelligence and creativity and some of the things that we either should be thinking about or aware of or not worried about in regards to artificial intelligence and machine learning. Jeff Melanson is an executive leader and prominent figure in the Canadian arts and culture community. For the last decade and a half, Jeff has worked in a number of well-known Canadian cities, contributing and helping to grow numerous different arts organizations. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Brian.
So tell me, why did you feel that you needed to make a comment about artificial intelligence and machine learning and its impacts on us and particularly creativity?
Basically, it was inspired by the work that I'm doing now. So my backstory, obviously, I ran cultural industries for about 20 years, and I'm now doing entrepreneurial work. I have a change management consulting practice. I'm a global strategic partner to Unity Technologies, which is one of the top gaming engines in the world. And I own a film studio company with film studios in Toronto and elsewhere. And I was finding in some of my public speaking, Brian, I was getting a lot of questions and feeling a lot of fear and anxiety that people are expressing around artificial intelligence, machine learning, impact on jobs, impact on industry, job loss, and so on. And just because I've, largely through the work with Unity Technologies, I'm seeing some of the potential on the ground across industries. It's really exciting. I wasn't writing the post to be a super booster and say everything's going to be perfect and this technology is going to save everything, because I think there's that side of the debate, which is equally as flawed, but there seems to be like an overweight in the media and general public around sort of the fear and anxiety.
The fear, for sure. Fear sells.
Yeah, and I felt that we kind of need to balance this out a little bit by looking at some of the possibilities and also remembering that as human beings, we go through periods of radical change. Like you think of the technologies that we've experienced in the last 150 years, for example.
Yeah.
And if you look at the cultural conversation in those moments, be they radio, electricity, internet, TV, Y2K, there's always this sort of evil technology around the corner that's going to wipe us all out. And it seems at some point we should maybe learn that, obviously they're going to be winners and losers with respect to the advent of these new technologies, but they've created new possibilities that are pretty exciting. So I was trying to sort of create a more balanced narrative around the possibilities that sit before us.
Your first sentence is kind of interesting on creativity. It seems to me that ChatGPT and other AI forms fairly clearly demonstrate that we are not as unique and creative as we thought we were.
Well, have you experimented with ChatGPT, Brian?
I have.
And what I find interesting, I similarly, and I've tried it in lots of different contexts. I've tried it for personal use. I've done some things with my dad. I've tried it in some industry contexts, and not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but for a new technology, it does a pretty good job of summarizing key topics. Like you can put philosophical questions in there. You can do market assessments. You can do business plan. Like there's all sorts of crazy stuff. With my father, for example, it was he was doing a toast, and I was like, "Oh, let's put in write a toast for me and see what it produces." And what you note if you try a lot of different applications is the framing of the argument is pretty much exactly what you'd expect. And so you read the output, and you're like, if I'd spent 3 weeks researching, thinking about this, I probably would have written something pretty similar to what ChatGPT just produced. So if you think about the applications of that, if an artificial intelligence engine can pull data, summarize it, synthesize it, and structure it in a way that we would expect, to what extent is that true? In terms of the ideas we express, the ideas we hear from day to day, like, wow, if it's that easy to create sort of a general aggregated wisdom around a topic, are our views that unique and creative, right? Because I think we all like to think, we're really creative, we're really stretching the envelope, and wow, this is going to be terrible, this robotic future where everyone thinks the same. And it's like, well, maybe we already do. Like if an AI or ChatGPT can produce something that's so close to what a fairly intelligent human might say about a subject. Again, not perfectly. What does that mean for what we think, how we think, what influences us, and how truly unique or how focused we might be on the sort of eccentric or the weird elements of who we all are as individuals.
That's interesting. We're chatting tonight about technology, about artificial intelligence, about machine learning, and Jeff Melanson, is that correct? Melanson is our guest. I apologize. Always want to try to get the pronunciation right because I'm not ChatGPT and I'm not good at getting these things over and over again right. A real expert in creativity and creative industries. About a post that he wrote that wasn't overly positive, but was certainly not overly negative, like a lot of the press that we received of late. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with Jeff on this topic of artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, etc. Stay with us, everybody.
So.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Jeff Melanson. He is an owner, entrepreneur, and advisor with extensive global experience in strategy and innovation across regions and sectors. He's known for his inventive approach to meeting disruptive innovation with bold strategy and practical vision. And we're talking about innovation, ChatGPT, machine learning. Jeff's got a really interesting background. For the last 4 years, he's been a partner at the Stratagem Group. Before that, he was a strategic partner at an organization, the leading platform creating and operating interactive real-time 3D content in San Francisco called Unity. Before that, he was an advisor with Landsberg Gurek Advisors, co-founder of the Creative Change Management Consulting Company, president and CEO of the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, president of the Banff Centre, special advisor to the Mayor and Arts and Culture in the City of Toronto, executive director and co-CEO of Canada's National Ballet School, dean of the Royal Conservatory of Music, director of development for Opera Ontario Incorporated, and it goes on and on and on and on. He's got an MBA from the Wilfrid Laurier University, and he's got a B.Mus, which I presume is a Bachelor of Music from the University of Manitoba. Pretty impressive resume.
I'm tired just hearing you read it, Brian.
I'm impressed by reading it. I'm not tired at all. It's impressive. It's a real pleasure to have you on my show. But let's get back, because I'd love to ask you about some of your issues and beliefs and experiences in your background. But you talked about this being comparable to other technological changes, and you compared it in your post to the printing press, to the telegraph, to the telephone, to the internet. How does this rank up in comparison to some of those technological changes? Is it the same as the Gutenberg press, printing press?
Yeah, I wouldn't say the same. I'd say where one could be critical of my argument fairly is, I would say, the scale, scope, and convergence of different technologies at once would make this pretty unique. Like we are living in an era where to see digital twinning and digital transformation and artificial intelligence and machine learning all sort of hitting us at the same time, that's unusual. But if you do look back at cultural theory, like the printing press was quite disruptive in terms of how ideas were to be captured, produced, and disseminated, right? So there was a lot of conflict around that technology. The internet, for those of us, you and I are both old enough to remember this, but there was this great excitement and fear of the internet and what it was going to do. And it's hard to imagine that there was a time where business leaders would have, looked askance at www as an example. When you think of industrial revolution transition, we want to talk about massive change, moving from an agrarian to an industrial economy. Pretty transformative. So I think that one definitely is very similar to this digital revolution that we're in the midst of. So I wouldn't say they're exactly the same, but I would say that if we look back historically, it's not unusual for new technologies to come. And by the way, in 25 years, it'll be something else we're talking about. And I think if we approach these things in a balanced way, that say, okay, from a governance perspective, how do we have to think about policy around these things so that they're well articulated and they don't hurt too many people, because there is going to be a disruption. but also look at the positive aspects of them. And there's many, on the artificial intelligence side, you just look at the kind of medical breakthroughs that are already sort of coming to the fore because we can process so much data. Like, the way that we can integrate, what people are missing, I think, on the artificial intelligence side is we've developed technologies all over the place, right? Like anywhere you go, shopping mall, your industrial environment, your home, there's tech everywhere. The difference is the tech doesn't speak across platforms. So there's no integration of that technology and there's no optimization of how it works. So you think of something even just as basic as environmental performance of an asset. We're not managing those systems in an integrated way. So if you start to manage industrial processes and businesses in a way that really synthesizes all of that data, IoT sensors, different databases, and optimizes the performance, there's huge advances that we can see across industries that are pretty exciting. So again, I wrote the blog post just because I was perceiving, and I spoke at a conference last week, where there was just so much anxiety around artificial intelligence and machine learning, these things. And what's interesting is people have strong views, and then you say, what's your exposure to this actually? And most folks would be like, well, I read this article and the Wall Street Journal said this and the Globe and Mail said that. And it's like,
well, the New York Times said the chat GPT said, leave your wife.
Yeah, well, there are undoubtedly there are negatives again in some of this, but I just think the conversation can't be disproportionately like doomsday scenarios. And
so I interviewed an entrepreneur, a tech entrepreneur, got experience in Silicon Valley and in Seattle, in top tech companies just the other week. And he said this was the most important technological change in the history of mankind, more important than the Gutenberg printing press, more important than the telephone, more important than the telegraph. What do you think?
Can't be. Like the printing press, if you think of the printing press, right? Think of, it's hard for us to imagine, but imagine a world before a printing press where narrative, story, language could only be passed person to person and the stories were told verbally. Being able to capture ideas, to house ideas and disseminate them, like that is a massive change. Now, granted, it didn't happen like in a minute. Like this is happening fast. AI is happening very quickly. But I would not, respectfully, I would disagree. I think it's exciting in terms of what could happen connected to AI, but to say, well, the printing press, I think we like also to look back and go like, oh, those people in the past, they were ignorant compared to what we know now. And it's like, we're not that different. Like, you think of even, philosophical writings that go back thousands of years, whether I don't know if you like Stoic philosophy, but you read some of the sort of viewpoints from 2000 years ago. And it's like, have we really advanced as far as we think we have? I think people who discount lessons from the past are making a big mistake. And something like the printing press, like huge transition. You look at radio technology, you mentioned I have a Bachelor of Music. When the radio was coming to the fore, it was going to destroy music. Because again, music at that point was presented in person, presented in a venue, and the idea you could record it and then share it with everybody. Oh, that's going to destroy livelihoods for musicians. The whole industry is going to collapse. The exact opposite happened. Things flourished, music is accessible, it's everywhere. So I think we get a little tied up in this sort of past, the control mechanisms and structures in society we have today. And we're not very good. Like, it's the irony for me, because I do a lot of work in disruptive innovation, Brian. Innovator's Dilemma by Clay Christensen was written in 1996. Disruptive innovation is a word that a lot of people use. Again, because I interact with a lot of people who are afraid of it, I'll say, do you know where the idea comes from? And it's incredible to me that even when you talk to business leaders and they say, well, I'm terrified of this AI or this disruption, and you say, what do you know about it? And they don't know anything about it. And like, if you don't really understand what's happening and you're going to adopt a fearful position without the information or exposure to it, probably not the best way to look at sort of new opportunities.
Your final sentence in your Fear the Future paragraph is, it might be healthier to expect, embrace change, and imagine new possibilities rather than disproportionately fearing its negative impacts. So we had this letter that came out signed by 50 leaders in the tech industry saying we should have a pause on AI and chat GPT, etc. You're saying no. It's a brave new world. Venture forth.
Yeah, I would respectfully say that. And I haven't studied this, Brian, so I'm gonna make an observation that may or may not have absolute merit across those leaders, but it's very odd to me when you see people that have invested and continue to invest in AI issue warnings to slow it down. So a number of the people on that list, 50 people, and there's some very, very prominent thinkers that are founding investors of OpenAI and ChatGPT,
Yeah.
who have integrated AI into their companies, and their companies are doing quite well with the integration of AI, who are suddenly concerned. They're not slowing down their own investment and development of it, by the way, but they're actually concerned that this might have an impact. If you were sitting on something that could be quite transformative, you may want to dissuade others from really paying as much attention to it as you are. So I find it a little bit peculiar, and not across the board, obviously not with all 50. And there's certainly some very profound thinkers. I have a lot of respect for Geoffrey Hinton, for example, and I would not put him in this camp at all. And when he withdrew from Google, that's a moment of pause. Like, that would be someone to talk to and to learn from, because obviously he's a renowned expert and thinker. So I would definitely not put him in this camp. But there's a lot of investors who express a lot of reservation about AI, which seems to contradict how they're using AI in their investment strategies and business development. I find that very peculiar.
So if you're not going to be fearful, and you're going to imagine new possibilities, and you're a business person or you're an entrepreneur, what would you do? Just get out there and start using it, trying it, experimenting?
Well, first what I would do is this. So if you look at business strategy, strategy is solving a problem in the world, right? So there's a bunch of assumptions that connect your business, the strategy you advance, and the external environment. The external environment's changing, right? So if you're not modifying your strategy on a semi-regular basis, you're probably going to find yourself disrupted at some point. If you look at the drivers of strategy, typically, historically, human, physical, financial resources drove how we developed strategy.
Yep.
What is happening in the digital world is the relationship between a digital universe and the physical world create new ways of thinking of physical assets. I'll give you an example. So an airport has hundreds of vendors, data sources everywhere. Quite remarkable that when you land at an airport, I'm sure you've had this experience, or many people landed at airports where you've flown across the ocean in a couple $100 million piece of asset with 200 other people. You land and perfect, everything goes well, but somehow the landing crew of the airport aren't there, and so you're sitting on the runway, the engine's burning, the GHG emissions are pumping out the airplane, and you kind of are flummoxed a little bit that something that's so coordinated internationally obviously has not been effectively managed from an operation. This is a very small example. At an airport, you've got, again, technology everywhere, separate vendors, and pretty much no tool to integrate all of that technology and optimize it. So in the case, I'll give you an example. Vancouver Airport has developed a digital twin with Unity that integrates all of that information, that tracks all the planes coming in, that integrates all the NavCan information. And you can optimize the human experience as a result. You can optimize the performance of the airport for GHG emissions, so to basically reduce greenhouse gases, manage direct energy through these tools, and so on. So I think with business leaders, to get back to your question, how we think about the physical assets that we manage is different. With COVID, everyone went home. We did this work from home. We're trying to figure out work from home. We are building new digital work environments that are much more dynamic than what you and I are doing now. What you and I are doing is very two-dimensional, right? But if you think of like a video game engine, I'll tell you a little bit about Unity here. A video game engine is something that allows many, many people to go into a space and create it. If you strip out the content from the video game engine and think of it as a printing press, a place to build a new reality, and you could integrate business processes into something that dynamic that allows that kind of collaboration, where you can also ingest all of the data from your old historical assets and optimize it. It's a game changer. It's a deflationary impact of technology, and there's heightened environmental performance. So that's just example. We talked about health examples. But there are many ways of thinking differently about strategy, how it fits with the external environment, and then how you govern and harness the potential of your resources to deliver better performance in a business environment.
Sounds like interesting, good advice for entrepreneurs and business people. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back with Jeff Melanson in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everyone. Interesting conversation about artificial intelligence, machine learning, ChatGPT, whether it's something we should be fearful of or whether it's something we should embrace and see how it changes our world, hopefully for the better. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour Saga 960. I'm having an interesting conversation tonight with Jeff Melanson, who's got really an incredibly interesting background in sort of the management of creative industries. And he recently wrote a post that I was really intrigued with, where he commented on artificial intelligence and machine learning. And his observations were, number one, that too often we're just fearful of the future, and we shouldn't be, because some of these technological changes. And he uses as an example the printing press, electricity, radio, television, internet, to name just a few, as examples of technological changes that were scary at first to a lot of people, but that in the end changed our society, hopefully, we think, for better. And then the second one was about creativity. And I want to delve into this a little bit more, if I could, Jeff. It was interesting because at the same time as I was reading some your thing and your post and some other things about creativity, I saw the results of a court case that you may be familiar with. Ed Sheeran was taken to court for, I guess it was plagiarism. And he went, I can't remember what the song was that he supposedly plagiarized, but he went to the court and he said, I could play like a whole bunch of songs with 4 chords. And it was only 4 chords that were repeated over and over and over again. And so you make this argument, which is kind of interesting. You say that we value uniqueness, creative, and originality. So why is AI so good at replicating our ideas, thoughts, and thinking? It seems likely that we have developed through education and our careers that we've become a product of society-wide groupthink, leading us to fairly narrowly organize our thoughts and thinking to be fairly uniform and predictable. Are there only 4 chords that matter?
That was a great pivot. No, he's right. Ed Sheeran is right. It was Marvin Gaye's song that he was being sued over with, like, I think it was Marvin Gaye's daughter or one of the relatives. And the point he was making is there are foundational musical elements that really go into most everything, right? So it's actually conceivable. The challenge is how do you judge that, right? Like, and he was right in his case, having heard both songs. It's hard to imagine that was plagiarism. There are other examples where it kind of is, where you're sampling somebody else's ideas. That's a little bit more direct. So, there's definitely more than 4 chords. He was correct that kind of like the recipe of someone baking a cake, right? The core ingredients that go into many things are going to be similar. And saying because someone uses flour, therefore they stole my cake recipe, is a little bit of a disingenuous argument. I think what I was, the point I was trying to make on the creativity side, and if you think about it from an educational standpoint, how do we learn to do something? We look backwards, we aggregate best practice from the past, and that becomes how we teach our young people and ourselves what works and what doesn't work, right? So most of education, not all of it, but a lot of it, looks backwards. So we're basically saying a previous era, here's what, even in management theory, we do case studies. We look backwards at things that people did in the past, and we kind of try to aggregate best practices and kind of do the best we can. That aggregation is imperfect, right? Because if I take a business case that I read from Harvard Business Review and I apply exactly that methodology to a different context, it's not going to produce the same outcome. So a lot of what we're doing, and I remember when I was in business school and doing my MBA, and we did one case study, and we were supposed to come up with a creative solution. I thought I came up with a creative solution. I got my mark back and it was a B-, and I was like deflated. I thought, this is outrageous. I did such a great job of this. And I went and met with the prof and I said, what? There wasn't really feedback on the report. And I said, so what did I do? What was missing here? What did I do wrong? And he said, well, I know the guy that the case is about, and that's not what he did. And I'm like, well, I don't really care what he did. I was coming up with a solution, and there's like hundreds of things you could have done. He said, well, but that's not what the guy did. And so we got in this sort of circular argument that I lost because I was not the professor and he was powerful, where I had not delivered exactly the answer that he wanted. And so I did it wrong. And I think when you develop children, and even in college and university level training, this backward looking aggregation, it's really important because like you have to do something, like, you know, otherwise how do you educate people? You can't do nothing. So you do have to look backwards, but we don't really say to people, take those tools and reimagine them and repurpose them in some way. That was the argument Ed Sheeran was making, is like, I'm taking that stuff from the past and I'm creating something new with it. And I think we're not so good at creating something new with it. I think most of us, a lot of what we think, a lot of what we do is regurgitation of what we've already done or what someone else has already done or something that we heard or something that we read. And there's a lot more to us. There's a lot more human potential than that. And so what I'd love to see people do from a creative perspective is start to look more into the future, to think like, I'm a weird guy, Brian, you're a weird guy. What is the weird articulation of Brian? Like, what does Jeff bring to the table that no one's done before? And how do I make the best of that past, but also find like new possibilities? And these new tools, these new technological tools, I wish people just for a second would pause the fear and say like, well, how could this be really positive? Or how could I find a way to learn more about this or develop it in my own way or bring my own special sauce to this, so to speak, to make something meaningful happen with these tools?
So if a lot of what we've done and what ChatGPT is doing is replication, a large language model that reads a whole bunch of things, or the way you've described it, this backward looking, that we've understood, and we've incorporated all this data set that we learned in school or from reading or from our MBAs or whatever it was that we got this data set from. What's creativity? Is creativity just bringing things from the past and replicating it in or is it coming up with something brand new? And if creativity is something brand new, can ChatGPT ever do it? Do humans ever really do it?
I think humans can do it. Like, I think nature, our nature is inventiveness, originality, and so on. And I think to some degree, you know, there was a great TED talk by Sir Ken Robinson. It's actually one, I think it was the #1 TED talk. I think it might be #2 now. It was Schools Kill Creativity. And I think, you know, those of us that have done well, and I would be very fortunate to have done okay my way through school. I was rewarded in school for giving the teachers what they wanted to receive, outside of that one example that I told you, the MBA program where clearly I didn't. And I think we've actually trained ourselves more than we think to replicate other ideas and other thoughts. And I think the argument I was kind of making is maybe ChatGPT is showing us that we're maybe a little bit too reliant on
Replicating past practices.
Replicating past practice, and not enough in like what could be different or what could be better. And I like bringing those things together. Like you talked about my background, I ran a lot of very old institutions that really struggle with adaptability. And I love the past. Like I honor the past. I think it's great. I think legacy, honor, structure, really important. But we now have these opportunities to say, okay, this is a reset moment. There may be ways to deploy our individual talents, our organizational talents, society in ways that are much more impactful than we've been thinking. And when we think incrementally based on past practice, which, as you know, a lot of budget cycles work this way for businesses or for government, is like you had your government, you have your budget from last year. This year you get X% more. And it's like, it's all very like incremental thinking. And if the decisions that were made 20 years ago that led to the budget you have today didn't really acknowledge the way things changed and the new possibilities that were put in front of you, you might be stuck doing the wrong thing indefinitely. So I think there are these moments where we can think a lot differently about this. And what I love about the idea of digital twinning as an example is like you build a digital twin above any sort of physical asset. And then you're like, well, I could pull whatever from the physical world into that. And then I can play with that data, or I can work with AI, or there's a sort of human machine kind of interface that's possible, that really opens up things that defy gravity, that defy some of the limitations that we've built around ourselves right now. So I think, I'd like us to be much more focused on our originality and creativity. I think as kids, we naturally have that. And I think we kind of lose it as we get older. So I'm hoping that we're going to have to capture that, because frankly, the things that are replicable, the AI will do most of those things better and more efficiently than we will.
You mentioned that you work for numerous different organizations that are very historic in our creative industries, and I think that includes opera and symphony and ballet and things like that. Is there originality in those? When I think about, I just got my annual advertisement to come to the Stratford Festival, and the big performance is King Lear. King Lear's been around for a couple hundred years, has it not? So what new is being produced in opera, in ballet?
Well, I'll say things. I'm going to give you a couple of controversial viewpoints on this, Brian, because I was a bit of a disruptor, I would say, in the creative space. And what I'm about to say, many people in the traditional creative industries would disagree with, but I think I might be right. I think, again, looking backwards, like I said, honoring the innovators of the past, and like a King Lear, or you look at the composers that people love in music, in their time, they created a new way of understanding what was possible in those art forms, right? So Shakespeare created new realities, new frameworks. The composers that we admire mostly stretched musical possibility. So when they wrote those pieces that we're still repeating hundreds of years later, those pieces, sometimes people stormed out. They were so outraged by what they saw because it was so out of the box. And I think what we owe to those innovators that are legendary is a modern version of that. So where I think the creative industries and culture, the traditional culture, has missed the mark a bit, is it has not continued to innovate. And it has not realized that part of the legacy of those famous composers and writers and dancers and choreographers was innovation. So we have not adapted. On the opera side, this is very controversial what I'm about to say, but I actually think opera became musical theater in the 20th century, and I think that's a fantastic thing. And I think if we actually embrace that and said, part of the operatic legacy is all these great operas from the past, but then people recontextualize that and created Broadway shows. So Les Mis and Phantom of the Opera and Hamilton, those are part of an operatic legacy. That to me makes a ton of sense. Saying, in some purists would be like, well, Les Mis is not opera. That's not real opera. That's not like the grand opera of the past. I'm like, isn't it? Like, if you think 100 years into the future, I think some of those works will be canonic in terms of people continuing to produce them. So I don't think the creative sector is immune to what I'm being critical of, I guess, in society here, and that I think it has also become a little bit too attached to doing more or less the same thing over and over and over and over, and probably could stretch the envelope of possibility a bit more than it does.
You're far more knowledgeable in this area than I, but Hamilton really is, I would have thought, something brand new. Hip hop rap in a show like Hamilton is something I've never seen before.
Like Lin-Manuel Miranda is a genius, like that for sure. You're seeing that. I think where there's a bit of a dysfunction, and it may well be just how we've chosen, because like most of what we live in, Brian, these are human designed systems, right? So anything we're in, be it a municipality, a business, an organization, a sector, it's a byproduct of a lot of people in the past who've built something. And I want to respect that. And most of them built things that didn't exist to some degree, right? Like in Canada's a great story. Like think of Canada 200 years ago, like everything we live in, people that came before us built all this stuff. Like it's pretty exceptional. It's like, well, what are we building next? And it's almost like we see ourselves more as stewards than builders at times. And I think there's possibilities there. So the Hamilton piece, just to come back specifically to your question, I think Lin-Manuel Miranda saw a great opportunity to bring hip hop into sort of the Broadway musical kind of realm through a number of works, and has done it very successfully. And has built things that I think it's a masterwork that you're going to still see on stages 100 years from now.
Hamilton.
Yes.
It's a fascinating story, in addition to being a great piece of art. It's a fascinating story. Jeff Melanson, thank you so much for joining us tonight and talking about your far more positive attitude toward artificial intelligence and machine learning. I really appreciate it. Your comments about not being overly fearful and thinking about creativity and how we need to try to be more unique and more creative, and that if all we do is replicate, then ChatGPT may be as good as us. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Let's get out there and have some fun.
We're going to take a break and come back with some concluding comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody.